Welcome to TradingNBI.com. This is John's Reporters for the 31st of July. So we're ending the month here right up at the, peak levels. We're still below that 30.22, which I was talking about. And like I said, every time we're slightly below that, we're going to be pressured to come back a little bit towards that 3,000, simply because you've got to get over it and stay above it for it to be sort of a baseline point where we don't really have any algo activity to suggest that it's going to be all that significant. I think we're just in a holding pattern right now until we get an answer on the Fed on if they're cutting rates, how much they're cutting them. Is it a little, a lot? How much influence does Trump have on them to do anything, which would be shocking compared to what we have seen in the past. So that would be a fundamental dynamic shift for the market, and I think that you would see it go considerably higher, despite the debt warnings and everything else that are looming out there. We're in a little P3 configuration here, which is just another level from the pivot, because the other ones happen usually at -7.5 to -13, so between 0 and -7 is a P3. It's not a third pivot or anything like that. It's just where it's located, and that's just an indication of the strength generally of the market. The biggest problem I've had, though, is this lower and lower shakeout histograms. It's going to cause a situation where we end up with a much bigger retrace, and all of a sudden, and it'll be one of those where it will only take a day or so to wipe out the entire gains of June through, and that's how markets typically do it, because everybody runs for an exit sell on the first sign of justifiable reason. The market doesn't fall just because you want it to. I think people have experienced that the last several years that we've been watching articles telling everybody how the market should have collapsed by now, and it just keeps rising simply because there's certain fundamentals that you just can't ignore. I mean, as long as corporations are buying back their shares, there's a floor for the value of those particular stocks, and if their performance is tied to their improvement, they do everything it takes to make that happen. And no place more evident than in the NASDAQ here, as we see that we literally, the last dip we had there, which was back before June, we moved with a DOC below -13.5. It hasn't even been below 7.5 throughout the last couple of months. That's significant strength, no question about it. The buyback in the euro, they're still trying to bring that back up, so it's going to be a continuation fight there. No reset of steel, so even if it does try to pop, it's not going to do anything significant, at least unless you get some dramatic change in that configuration where the steel would dip down. Gold still maintaining itself, and again, this is another one, red DOC above 0 the entire time of this rally, and even during this softening period of the shakeout. It's also had a steel reset, though, the whole time, which certainly helps, because it means you have short-term buyers fully loaded and just pop in every time that, every time it's been approaching the ABM, at least for the last month here, and then even when it did dip below, it barely touched the ABM green and bounced right off of it as well. And that's just because central governments are purchasing up what's available. From our 5K standpoint, it was pretty clean. We ended up with a nice little decline that started to go. We had no reset. Well, the reset starts here, but once it crosses, you have about 4 or 5 bars that it's going to actually have an impact, but no orange dip at that time. So no signal at all. It wasn't until we ended up moving down here, we got the crossover setup that came across at this point, below the -13.5, which tends to be fairly bullish, and then it made an additional pivot, which is where the pink bar decided to color change that. It still ended up dipping a little bit lower, but you can see that that's where you get that immediate pop back kind of move takes place, and that's when the shakeout got back up to 0, and it just took off from there and literally barely got to the 50% point of that move, and then just kind of went flatline, but it did get a reset of steel at those points. So at that point, you know that, hey, your broader short power has sort of been blocked off at that particular spot, and it's free to do whatever signal comes in next. And in this particular case, they were bullish. Cyan moved under red, but once we got up there, DOC spread Had moved to very close to that 15. I always find these when they get right up to the 15 but don't quite get over it, tend to be a bit more sketchy. This one didn't dip as much as I would have expected. We had the reset here, the crossover, and in this case you did get the dip of the orange going below, and it still traded sideways even though you had accelerating DOC red. It was still enough to take out the highs, but it's been very choppy and sporadic. It's one of those where if you're anywhere even remotely close with a stop, you're done. You're going to have to either be on the other side of the zero lines or above them, depending on whether you're short to follow those constructs. At this particular point, we're in a modest DOC spread here. We had a rollover of red below zero right now on the 5K, and we've been making lower histograms. Question is, will it go negative? That's really going to be the key. If it doesn't go negative again, and you see a pop up, it's only going to spurt from there. I'll be sending out indicators sometime during the market activity. That way you'll be able to have them loaded as soon as the close, being ready for Thursday and the 1st of August, and it should be an interesting one as we get towards the dog days. As always, though, if there's anything unique or whatever, I will put it up, and we will talk again later. Trade well.